We have Representative Tipper here in the House, and Representative Soper also. So we'll go ahead and call up Senate Bill 224 and give our sponsors an opportunity to get settled in. Need one of these, you have one. All right. Okay. Well, welcome, representatives. Who wants to start us off? Representative Tipper.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, committee. Today I bring to you one of my last bills here in the legislature, Senate Bill 224. This, in many ways, is a bill that's been years in the making, and it was inspired in part by a very disturbing story of fertility fraud here in Colorado that Representative Rich is familiar with because it came out of her district in Grand Junction. Emmons-Boring, who was the named plaintiff in that case, found out when she was in her 30s through doing a DNA test online that her father was not her genetic father. But what unraveled after that was a realization that her genetic father was actually her mother's gynecologist, and that she had several half-siblings located throughout the United States who had also been fathered, or not fathered, but who were genetically related to her. And so in 2019, she approached this legislature to run a bill to criminalize the doctor's conduct. And we did that. But as part of that bill, because just to make it clear, Maia's mother did not know that the donor, the anonymous donor, was actually her gynecologist. That was not disclosed. And not only was Maia a product of that insemination, but also her younger sister, and like I said, other siblings that she had no idea she was related to. As part of that legislation, Maia had told me, this is a really unregulated industry. And I got to learn a little bit about what it means to someone when they find out that they're genetically not who they thought they were. Of course, you can imagine sort of the social impacts, the psychological impacts, but from a really practical perspective, she said to me, my medical history, I don't know my medical history. It's a lie. What I thought it was is a lie. And so I started to understand a little bit more about kind of the complicated nature of what has been an industry that for the most part has guaranteed anonymity, has used anonymity, I think initially good faith, to try and encourage people to donate sperm and eggs so that other individuals could create their families. But what we know is that this has had sort of a perverse effect because individuals have lied about who they are, what their background is, about how many times they've donated sperm, mostly. And then years later, like in Maia's case, with the advent of 23andMe and Ancestry.com and all these things, people find out that they're not just donor conceived, but they're able to find out who the donor was. So we can't guarantee anonymity anymore. And in fact, what we're seeing is that anonymity kind of proliferated these fraudulent cases and has perpetuated a lot of harm. That lack of transparency, I think initially done under with best intentions, has actually perpetuated a lot of harm. So what Senate Bill 224 does is that it establishes really minimum standards for donor sperm and donor and the donor egg industry. And in doing that, we stand-up protections for donor-conceived individuals, so the Maias of the world, as well as the donors, who are, of course, acting in good faith, and then the families of both. And what I mean by that is, in other cases, some of which you might hear about today, an individual doesn't know they're donor-conceived. They fill out, they do the DNA tests, and they realize they have siblings, in some cases upwards of 50, in some cases hundreds of siblings. And we're talking siblings, right? It's not cousins. These are individuals that are genetic siblings. And it's fairly easy with social media now to kind of triangulate and figure out who the donor is, even if the donor never submitted themselves to an Ancestry.com or 23andMe. And then the donor is contacted, and it's documented, and we've had lawsuits where the donor is actually very disturbed because they did not anticipate that 30 years down the line they were going to have 25 or 30 or 40, 50 genetic offspring, and that those offspring were going to contact them. So what this bill does is, like I said, set these parameters that try and address a complicated set of circumstances, but it's in recognition that the ground has really shifted. We've worked really hard to remove some of the stigma associated with assisted reproductive technology, particularly donors. It used to be, when this first started, that physicians would say, they would do an insemination and they'd say, go home and have sex. And so there was some plausible deniability to the parents. And of course you can understand parents wanting their child to be genetically theirs. But so part of what this does is try and disrupt some of that stigma, get rid of the secrecy that has really fueled some of this fraud, and also kind of downplay the significance of what being a donor means. So the bill allows for individuals who are conceived through donations, once they turn 18, to have access to their donor's identity and medical information. Before they turn 18, their parents or guardians can access de-identified medical information. I think that's obvious why it's important for a donor-conceived individual to know their full medical history. It establishes a family limit of 25 and works with industry, sperm and egg banks, who I'll talk about that a little bit later, who will employ best practices to kind of monitor that, so that we don't have situations where, like we saw in the New York Times, an individual realizes by going on Ancestry.com that they have at least 100 siblings. And then it establishes a minimum age of 21 for donors. So both men and women donating eggs or sperm have to be 21 years old. And part of that is a recognition of the psychological consequences of really understanding what it is that you're doing, and that 18 years down the line, what might happen. And then finally, we require licensure through CDPHE. I'll just close by saying this bill, I talked to Senator Fenberg about it in January. We have spent months working on it, but like so many things, the rubber really meets the road in the last few weeks of session. Industry, lawyers, dozens of lawyers, donor-conceived individuals, family members, we have spent hundreds of hours over the last month in particular working on this bill and getting it to the place that it is. I'm so grateful for industry that really came to the table and said, we support the goals. We think these things are unworkable. Here are our suggestions. We've taken a lot of those suggestions and adopted it into the Senate bill, which passed unanimously 35-0. And I'll just also say to the dozens of donors the donor-conceived individuals that have shared their stories, some particularly heartbreaking, of understanding that they are carrying a genetic disease that they had no idea they were at risk for, or that they've passed on a genetic disease to their children that they didn't know they were at risk for passing on. And to Maia, who was in my case, the original inspiration. So thank you. And with that, I'll turn it over to my co-prime and ask for your enthusiastic support of Senate Bill 224.
Representative Soper.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to my co-prime sponsor, Representative Tipper. It's great to be on another bill with you. This is one that Representative Tipper came to me about probably a couple weeks ago and started talking about kind kind of a whole new category for me. And I remember stepping back because I'm one of those who's always loved genealogy and the fascination with genealogy, knowing where you came from and who you are, who those previous generations were that make you, you. And I can remember going through and doing both 23andMe and Ancestry.com because of my love of curiosity. Of course, I had to double check to see what the differences were in the outcome based on kind of your genetic makeup. Now, I did not discover any long-lost siblings through that, but I will tell you that I'd always been told that a large part of who I was German and English, and that was it. Well, what I discovered was 40% on both of them, Ancestry and 23, was actually French, and that there was, yes, there was still some English, but actually a lot of Scandinavian. And so even through that experience, you realize through a tool like this, you could easily triangulate to realize, oh, there could be a sibling out there. The world has changed a lot, and if this was a decade ago, none of us would probably be sitting here listening to a bill like this. This is a first-in-the-nation type bill. But about 8 years ago is when the world started shifting with the ability to do ancestry DNA tests and people being able to figure out who they're related to and start to triangulate. And as more people got involved and started doing that, all of a sudden someone who had been a sperm or egg donor and they donated anonymously, perhaps when they were in college, to earn a couple extra dollars, now were being revealed. And they had people coming and knocking on their door saying, oh, we're related. You're my dad. Or, you need to start establishing some sort of a relationship there. But then there's the curiosity. And I think that's an element to be human, is to be curious about who you are and where you come from. And so as people want to explore that, it's not just to find out the individual, but they also want to find out their medical history. So that if you go to a doctor and you see the box that says, do you have a history of cancer or heart disease? You kind of want to be able to check that box accurately based on real science and real medicine, not based on the fact that technically you don't know at least 50% of that answer, and that's a great unknown. And so you could have a lot of genetic diseases that really you ought to be able to know because could be addressed. And through modern medicine, we've actually been able to solve those. So being able to identify that. The piece about setting the minimum donation age at 21 to be a gamete donor is very important because it is very psychological to understand what it means to have multiple offspring and the fact that people are going to be asking about your medical history if you're going to be a donor. But likewise, that the donor's identity be revealed at 18 if they choose to do so, which I do want to point out is consistent with Colorado's adoption laws. And it's the exact same thing that happens on the adoption side of the equation. So we have been very consistent with other areas of law that are very similar. And then limiting the number of recipient families per gamete donor to 25. This is important from the aspect of, if you're looking at the gene pool, you could easily have a scenario like what happened in Grand Junction and have hundreds of people related to one person. And that certainly could, especially in a very small, tight-knit community, jeopardize a lot of things. The worst thing that could happen is you wake up one day and realize the person you're dating happens to be your half-sister. And in a very small town, that easily could be without having some of the safeguards that we've included here, and then the regulation of fertility clinics. I like this bill. It's a great bill. It's one that really is pragmatic to our point in time, our point in history. And it's, I like it. Vote yes. Thank you.
Okay, thank you to our bill sponsors. Committee members, do we have any questions for our bill sponsors? Okay, seeing none, we will move on to witness testimony, and we have about 10 people signed up, so let's look and see who's here. Oh, yes, Representative Tipper.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was hoping if we have any opposition that they could go first. And then if we could move to amend neutral, and then go to proponents, and I do have kind of a list of 5 proponents that I know of, but if there's more than that.
Great. So we only have amend, neutral, and in support signed up to testify. So we'll bring up Ms. Heidi Hayes, and she's joining us remotely. Oh, great. Heidi Hayes, and then Ellen Trachman and Debbie Villafana. And we will begin with Ms. Hayes. Please introduce yourself and let us know who you represent, and you have 2 minutes for testimony.
Hello, my name is Heidi Hayes, and I'm a mother of 2 donor-conceived persons. I would like to applaud the legislature on your intent to ensure children like mine will have access to their genetic heritage and to take pride in their conception. I also founded Donor Egg Bank USA to ensure affordability and access to donor eggs. I recently retired, therefore I have no conflict of interest. First, I would like page 11, line 14 to be amended to remove the word interfere and add the word prohibit in its place, and lines 16 through 20 to be deleted. Gamete banks are a resource that can be used to facilitate communication. This is particularly useful in situations between half-donor siblings who vary in age and knowledge level regarding their conception. In these cases, direct communication can result in more harm than good. The bank can address all donor-conceived persons' needs using standardized best practices. My children don't presently want a relationship with their donor. In our case, the donor's mother wants to meet my children, and my donor had to restrict her direct access. The desire for contact goes both ways, and Gamete Bank should be available to help in communication. Second, I'd like to amend the definition of the term medical information to mean clinically relevant medical information. This would exclude release of extraneous medical screening and private details that are not clinically relevant. There is a distinction between information needed for medical decision-making and information that is only relevant to the donor, but may be private and personal. Banks need the donor's willingness to be transparent in order to select the right candidate. Third, please amend the donor declaration to attest before a notary, witness, or through a secure electronic platform. One must consider advances in technology that facilitate high-quality donor services. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Hayes. And Ms. Trachman, please introduce yourself, and you have 2 minutes for testimony.
Thank you, Madam Chair and committee members. My name is Ellen Trachman. I'm testifying on behalf of Colorado Fertility Advocates, a nonprofit dedicated to supporting Colorado families and individuals facing fertility struggles. Colorado Fertility Advocates Board and membership includes experienced Colorado fertility doctors, mental health professionals, lawyers, and advocates. During the Senate committee hearing for this bill, we asked for a no vote. Today, after significant changes of the bill and collaborative work with the sponsors, we've moved to a neutral position. We think the reasons for that evolution is important. Colorado Fertility Advocates supports the objectives of this bill, the protection of donor-conceived persons and their families. Our concerns have focused on and continue to be the suspected but unknown effects of the bill. Particularly, we have concern that this type of law, never before seen in the United States, without careful tailoring, would reduce access to fertility care and family-building options in Colorado. The sponsors offered to hear our concerns and work to improve the bill. They have made good on that offer, spending countless hours and late nights listening to the voices of those who would be directly impacted. After hearing these concerns, they've made significant amendments. Among those are clarifying key definitions, roles, and expectations between fertility clinics, gamete banks, and gamete agencies, capping annual licensing fees to reduce the financial impact to providers and hopeful parents, removing family-to-family embryo donations from the limitations to avoid the forced destruction of embryos, and working with fertility providers to ensure that the bill did not leave Coloradans without family-building options. Even with these changes, there are strong and varied opinions among our members. However, we can state with certainty that substantial progress has been made. Further, if this bill is passed, we are hopeful that rulemakers will work collaboratively with Colorado Fertility Advocates and other Colorado professionals to ensure implementation in line with the goals of the bill without unnecessarily harming Colorado families. Thank you for the chance to be heard. I'm available for questions.
Thank you, Ms. Trachman. Ms. Debbie Villafana, please introduce yourself, and you have 2 minutes for testimony. So, Ms. Villafana, we see that you're muted.
Okay, let's try that again. Sorry about that.
Perfect, no problem.
All right, good afternoon. My name is Debbie Villafana, and I'm the Donor Aid Program Director for Fairfax Egg Bank. On behalf of the industry-leading donor egg banks, I'm here to provide information about our donor screening and safety processes. We support the motivations behind this bill because not every gamete bank looks out for its donors or future donor-conceived people. We understand the need for minimum protections to protect the less scrupulous gamete banks from taking advantage of donors and disregarding the rights of the donor-conceived. We want to emphasize that all of our processes are designed to ensure donors have the proper motivations, the right medical and family histories, and the best outcomes. Our screening process is so rigorous that less than 1% of applicants are accepted into our program. We require extensive interviews, psychological evaluations, and educational sessions so we are certain donors are joining the program based on altruistic motivations. We want donors to understand the serious implications of their decision to donate, especially when they are committing to share their identities with their donor-conceived offspring. We believe donor-conceived people have the right to know who their genetic parents are, and we do not want to risk accepting a donor who is not committed to honoring that right. If we don't take every step to protect and educate our donors by using best clinical practices and research-based medication protocols, then they will not understand what they're signing up for, and the side effects could quickly discourage their further participation. But simply, we understand why the proponents of this bill want to enact minimum standards to protect the interests of donors and donor-conceived people. It is absolutely essential that banks follow ASRM guidelines on donor cycle limits and educate donors and recipients about key issues related to donor gametes. At the same time, we are not convinced that legislating specific operational procedures is the most effective way to drive best practices. We have appreciated the opportunity to share our perspective in conversations with this bill's sponsors and stakeholders, and we look forward to continuing those discussions. Leading egg banks like Fairfax Egg Bank and Donor Egg Bank USA, and our affiliated cryobanks, Fairfax Cryobank and California Cryobank, are committed to working alongside these groups to develop and model best practices to achieve the most positive outcomes for donors and donor-conceived people. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Villafana. All right, committee members, do we have questions for any of these witnesses? Representative Sandridge.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and this question's for you. What within this bill makes you hesitant to going to full support on it? Thank you.
Ms. Hayes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Representative. So there are many elements, and part of being Colorado Fertility Advocates is there are lots of interests involved, so doctors, lawyers. I can tell you one that I personally have that doesn't necessarily speak for the whole group. So one element is that there is an absolute limitation, with exceptions, of egg donors not going over six egg retrievals. So that is a guideline under the American Society for Reproductive Medicine, but for some of us, it feels like it is taking decision-making away from women to decide the risk for their own body. It's not about the limitation of how many offspring, but specifically about her ability to make decisions for herself and her risks.
All right, any additional questions for these witnesses? Seeing none, thank you all so much for your time and perspective today. We appreciate it. All right, I'd next like to call up Tiffany Gardner, Naomi Cahn, and Rachel Lemmons. Not sure if they're joining us remotely. Okay, so we'll begin with Ms. Gardner. Ms. Gardner, please introduce yourself and let us know who you represent, if anyone, and you have 3 minutes, or rather 2 minutes for testimony.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair Bird and Finance Committee members. My name is Tiffany Gardner, and I'm a wife, mother, attorney, and Vice President of Communications for U.S. Donor Conceived Council. I am also a late discovery sperm donor conceived person, and I support this bill. I learned the truth of my conception 4 years ago. Doing so shook my life like a snow globe. Nothing made sense until I found my biological father, who lives 30 miles away. What followed was a year-long friendship until his adult sons, my genetic brothers, learned of our meetings. His acknowledgement of my existence upset his family, leading him to cut off all forms of our communication. On a happier note, one of my newly discovered siblings and I are close enough to spend major holidays together. But while my 3 sons have enjoyed the experience of getting to know our new loved ones, the sudden growth of a new branch on our family tree is hard to explain. My 8-year-old struggles to understand why his biological grandfather no longer speaks to me and does not want to know him. In my son's own words, "You can't help that he made you." I support this bill because gametes should only be donated with the expectation that the donor will be identified and likely contacted, and this bill accomplishes that goal. Donor-conceived people are the product of a meticulous transaction, and yet our long-term needs have never been a priority. This bill ensures donors and intended parents are educated on those needs, including the impacts of donation and the importance of disclosure. Had my biological father learned the importance of disclosing his donor status to his family from the beginning, perhaps my sons could meet the man we each resemble in different ways. Please support people like me and my sons. Please support this bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Gardner. Ms. Cahn, please introduce yourself, and you have 2 minutes.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Madam Chair Bird and members of the Finance Committee. My name is Naomi Cahn, and I teach at the University of Virginia School of Law, and I'm testifying on behalf of myself and Sonia Suter from George Washington Law School. This testimony is submitted in our individual capacities only. I must emphasize we reference the law school where we teach for affiliation purposes only. We are law professors who have been writing about and teaching in this field for the past quarter century. Sonia was a genetic counselor prior to attending law school. I have used in vitro fertilization, and I can say this with permission, my IVF daughter is actually a grad student at DU. The Colorado legislation is both groundbreaking and a continuation of what other states are doing in this area. Other states are also beginning to regulate donor identity release issues and related issues relating to the fertility industry, and of course other countries, including England and Australia, have also ensured that donor-conceived people can learn the identity of their donors. The Colorado legislation brings together these various trends to ensure that donor-conceived people can learn the identity of their donor upon reaching adulthood and upon request. So it's not automatic, it's upon request. And of course, we've already spoken about the limits on the numbers of families who could create children through any particular donors, ensuring that donor-conceived people don't feel, as at least some of them do, dehumanized by finding dozens of genetic siblings, and it ensures that there are educational materials available. The need for this legislation is clear. First, anonymity as a pragmatic matter can no longer be guaranteed, as Representative Tipper has already noted. Accordingly, state regulation can help set out thoughtful rules that are responsive to the various interests at stake, as this very process shows. Second, and more fundamentally, donor-conceived people have interests that this legislation will protect. We understand that there are concerns that this legislation might decrease the supply of donors. There is ample evidence, however, that those concerns are overblown, as we discuss in our written testimony. Finally, the legislation is focused on donor-conceived people, but has already been referenced. Colorado already treats donor-conceived families somewhat differently from others, such as through laws relating to parentage, and, of course, this puts donor-conceived people in line with what Colorado has done with respect to adoptees. Colorado has an opportunity to provide fairness to donor-conceived people and their families through passage of this much-needed legislation. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Cahn. Ms. Lemmons, please introduce yourself, and you also have 2 minutes for testimony.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair Bird and members of the Finance Committee. My name is Rachel Lemmons. I live in Denver, and I've been both an anonymous and known egg donor. On behalf of myself and We Are Egg Donors, which is a donor advocacy group of nearly 2,000 egg donors, we support Senate Bill 224. In the donor screening process, I was never educated on how my decision to donate could impact those born from my donations. I was told my obligations ended after egg retrieval. When I had my daughter, I began to regret my anonymous donations. She's able to know where her DNA comes from and her evolving family medical history. The children born from my donations deserve the same. My concerns about the impact to the lives I helped create were confirmed by speaking directly with donor-conceived persons. Many donors have the same experiences and concerns as I do. Had I known I may never be able to fulfill an ethical obligation to the lives I helped create, I would have never donated anonymously. The problem was that I was never educated on the impacts of being a donor or the challenges donor-conceived persons face. Donors cannot give informed consent when they aren't informed. I I urge you to support Senate Bill 224. In addition to the essential rights it would establish for donor-conceived persons, it would provide much-needed changes for egg donors. It contains provisions on materials to educate donors on the importance of open ID, which allows them to make an informed decision on whether they should donate. It prioritizes the health of donors by creating a statutory limit on the number of cycles egg donors can complete. It also places reasonable limits on the network of half-siblings, which also benefits donors, their family, and their children. The truth is that our obligations don't end after egg retrieval. When you deliberately help create life, those obligations last a lifetime. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lemmons. Committee members, do we have questions for any of these witnesses? Seeing none, thank you all so much for your time and perspective. We appreciate it. All right. I would like to call up Sarah Jeffers and Jillian Phillips. And is there Dr. Diane Tober present? No? All right. Just going to go through our list here. Ms. Alice Ruby. And she's online. Okay, great. So let's start first with Ms. Jeffers. Please introduce yourself. Let us know who you represent, if anyone, and you have 2 minutes for testimony.
Thank you, Madam Chair Bird and members of the Finance Committee. My name is Sarah Jeffers, and I am here today in support of SB 224. I was born in Thornton, Colorado, and am currently attending the University of Colorado at Boulder. My parents told me that I was donor conceived when I was in preschool. I was raised as an only child. They mentioned a couple times growing up that I might have half-siblings out there, but I didn't think about it much until 11th grade when I was assigned a family tree project. I opened my Ancestry.com account to do some research, but was met with the results of a DNA test I had taken as a kid and forgotten about. I saw matches, my siblings, my family. Now it is 3 years later, and I have found 18 siblings through DNA testing and over 30 in total. Every couple months, a new one emerges. This April alone, there were 2. With just my siblings, you could fill an entire classroom and then some. Please picture that number, 30 people, 10 sisters, 22 brothers, and many more unknown. My parents were assured by their sperm bank that there would be 10 children total. When I told them that the current number was over 30, they were appalled. The bank that created me lied. There was nothing in place to hold them accountable, no legislation, and there will never be a way to know the true number of siblings I have. I will spend the rest of my life wondering as that number grows sickeningly larger. This is why SB 224 is so important. It creates enforceable licensing requirements and a family limit for banks to follow, or they risk losing their license to serve Colorado families. This is an amazing first step towards making the fertility industry safer and more ethical, which ultimately protects the parents, donors, and donor-conceived people like myself. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Jeffers. Ms. Phillips, please introduce yourself, and you'll need to unmute, and you have 2 minutes for testimony.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the Finance Committee. My name is Jillian Phillips, and I'm the Vice President of the Government Affairs for the U.S. Donor Conceived Council, and I'm here today in support of Senate Bill 224. The issue is important to me because as a donor-conceived person, I have faced various genetic issues as a direct result of having no family medical history. I was diagnosed with a rare genetic condition in 2019, almost a decade after my symptoms began. Having no known family medical history led to a delay in diagnosis and treatment. I have had 6 surgeries in the last 2 years, all were directly related to this condition. Since finding my biological father, I have learned that I'm at risk for serious heart issues. My biological aunt and biological grandfather both passed away young due to heart health issues. Had I not found my biological father, I would never have known that I need to be under the close care of a cardiologist. Meeting my biological father could have literally saved my life. Senate Bill 224 recognizes the importance of family medical history to the health of donor-conceived people. It would require banks and clinics to maintain a donor's medical records and obtain regular updates that donor-conceived people can request. When drafting this bill, we engaged numerous stakeholders. I'm thrilled to say that supporters include parents of donor-conceived people, the nation's largest organization of egg donors, National Gay and Lesbian Groups, the Sperm Bank, one of the largest egg donor agencies in the country, mental health professionals, and industry and attorneys. Thank you for your time and attention. I'm happy to answer a few questions.
Thank you so much, Ms. Phillips. Ms. Ruby, please introduce yourself, and you also have 2 minutes for testimony.
Good afternoon. My name is Alice Ruby, and I'm the Executive Director of the Sperm Bank of California. We are the only nonprofit sperm bank in the U.S., and we support increasing openness in family building through gamete donation. Specifically, we support donors agreeing in advance to release their identifying information to donor-conceived adults, and gamete donation programs taking good faith measures to maintain pregnancy outcome records and limit the number of families per donor. From decades of experience and Dr. Joanna Sheb's published research about our program, we believe that these efforts are feasible, work well together, and lead to the best outcomes for all parties, donor-conceived people, recipient parents, and gamete donors. We established the first open identity gamete donation program in the world in 1983. We have tracked pregnancy outcomes for 40 years. We have 20 years experience releasing donor identities to donor-conceived adults. There are challenges, but every adult who completed a request has received their donor's identity through our program. Based on interviews with a subsample of these requesters, not one adult regretted learning the donor's identity, even when the donor was not as they had hoped. Initially, we offered donors an anonymous option. However, for the past 8 years, all new donors have agreed to release their identity to donor-conceived adults. Donors and donor-conceived people tell us that they appreciate the structured program and support in the process of sharing identifying information. Tracking pregnancy outcomes is necessary to maintain an open identity program and provide support, including sharing medical updates. These factors together make open identity donation work. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ruby. Committee members, do we have questions for any of these witnesses? Seeing none, thank you all so much for making time. We appreciate your perspective today. All right, I'll make one last call. Is there anybody present or online who didn't sign up but wishes to testify? Seeing none, the witness testimony phase is closed. Come back to our bill sponsors. It's the amendment phase. Bill sponsors, do you have any amendments? Yes, Representative Soper.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move Amendment L007.
Okay, making sure we've all got a copy of this, so please tell us about your amendment.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. This is actually one of those amendments that if you love good grammar, you're going to love this amendment because it really does make it good grammar by ensuring that good grammar, it's a good grammar amendment, because the Senate passed a number of amendments and kind of in their fast-paced work, missed a couple of areas in making sure that the bill reads well and is grammatically correct. So we'd ask for a yes vote in these technical clarifications.
Okay, is there any discussion or are there any questions about this, about Amendment L007? Seeing none, is there objection to Amendment L007? L007 is passed. Representative Tipper.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move Amendment L008.
Is there a second?
Second. Oh.
Okay, Amendment L008 has been properly moved by Representative Tipper, seconded by Representative Soper. Please tell us about your amendment.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This amendment is also kind of cleanup, but is more substantive. It's the result of a lot of conversations with lawyers and industry folks to get the definitions right. So it's technical in nature, just because the language is very technical. But I will point out one thing in here, because one of the witnesses mentioned this. Ms. Hayes talked about on page 11 eliminating interfere. What we had contemplated there is we didn't want sperm and egg banks to basically meddle in a negative way so that donor-conceived people could not have contact or learn the identity of their donor. But what we recognize after talking to the industry is that a lot of times the initial response from the donor is not good. And so giving them some space and sort of the ability, ultimately they are actually trying to facilitate that connection, but that could be construed as interfering. And what we really want to say is that they're not going to prohibit or impede that connection. So that's the change that we make that responds to Ms. Hayes' concern. With that, I ask for a yes vote.
Okay, is there any further discussion on Amendment L008? Seeing none, is there objection to this amendment? No objection. Amendment L008 is passed. Bill sponsors, do you have any additional amendments? Committee members, do we have any amendments? Seeing no amendments, the amendment phase is closed. Wrap up. Representative Soper.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, members of the committee. First of all, I want to thank my co-prime, who really did do the heavy lifting here. Second of all, this is a bill that comes out from evolving technology and the fact that we have emerged as a society to be one where we actually now are doing DNA tests voluntarily to find out about our ancestry, about who we are, to be medically relevant for being able to diagnose diseases. The future is only going to expand this. And this bill recognizes the emergence of technology that's here and is really a reality of where we are in time. I hope you'll support this bill today for the reasons that we listed just a few minutes ago during our introductory remarks. Thank you.
Committee. Oh, before we move the bill, any closing comments, committee members? Oh, I'm so sorry. Representative Tipper.
Thank you, Madam Chair. No, I just wanted to touch on a couple of things that came up in testimony. And then I also promised Maia that I would read a little bit of her testimony. She wasn't allowed to be here. So I wanted to mention that what the witnesses talked about clinically relevant medical information. We had considered that, but the UPA has been adopted in several states. It's been considered in Colorado, and the goal was to keep it consistent with the UPA. So we can continue to revisit that. I don't want it to be suggested that, or I don't want folks to think that we didn't consider that. Ms. Trachman talked about the egg retrieval limitation. I just want to be, so folks understand, one retrieval is not just retrieving one egg. For example, when I did IVF, the retrieval resulted in 26 eggs, which is more, it's almost 2.5 years worth of eggs, what a woman would normally ovulate. And so the process is intensive. It's a lot of drugs. It's a surgical procedure. There are risks associated with it. And that's obviously very different than what it's required to produce or extract a sample from men, for example. So there is a difference between women donating and men donating, and that's why you see that with the medical guidelines, a suggestion of limiting it to 6 total egg retrievals. But the bill that we have before us doesn't just limit it to that. It adopts the recommendation, and then on top of that has a way for basically people to advocate for more than 6 retrievals. So I just want to be clear, we're not limiting women's mental or physical health, reproductive health in a way that I think was sort of suggested, but I can understand the concern. And then lastly, I just wanted to say, part of the journey for me on this has been understanding how it can feel very dehumanizing, how you can feel like a commodity. And while, of course, we want to encourage people to donate and help other parents become parents, we don't want to do that at all costs. And what we have in front of us is a really measured balance, taking in input from all sorts of folks. I appreciated the witness who said donors can't give informed consent if they're not informed. To me, this bill really speaks to that. And I'll just close, if I could, with some of the comments from Maia, who, like I said, was kind of the original inspiration for me. By the way, as luck would have it, the jury in Grand Junction handed down almost $9 million verdict last week. So she was on a gag order and couldn't testify, which is why I promised her that I would read this. My name is Maia Emmons-Boring. I ask that you please support Senate Bill 224. The issue is important to me because I'm a sperm donor conceived person born in Grand Junction, Colorado, 1980. I've had to deal with many issues being a donor-conceived person. For example, I don't know my family health history. I've recently learned that a few genetic conditions have been passed down to me through my donor side, and I have passed them on to my children. Cystic fibrosis is one condition. I have a sister who was born with cystic fibrosis. The birth of her son with cystic fibrosis was a shock to her because she did not know that she was a carrier. Not being able to answer half of the questions on a health form is disconcerting. This act would also make gamete banks and donors accountable for their actions and how their business is conducted. I'm a victim of fertility fraud, and a bill like this would have made it extremely unlikely that the fraud could ever have taken place. It's important for these organizations to have procedures in place to protect all three parts of the triad: the donor, the recipient parents, and the donor-conceived person. Because I'm a victim of fertility fraud, my 16 siblings and counting have no idea how many offspring were created in the 22-year period that the doctor was doing this. We have no access to our paternal health history, and we suffer the consequences of fraud committed by our mother's gynecologist. SB 224 would eliminate the pain of future generations of donor-conceived people and their parents. Thank you for taking the time to listen. We, of course, are more than our DNA, but I hope that the committee can understand the harm that has been perpetuated and the hope that we have in this bill to stem the flow of that harm.
Representative Soper.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Did you want to move the bill? I'll move Senate Bill 224 to, where are we?
Appropriations.
Appropriations.
Second.
As amended with a favorable recommendation.
Okay, that bill has been properly moved by Representative Soper, seconded by Representative, was it Kipp who seconded? Okay. It's all right. Vice Chair Snyder.
I had some comments.
Oh, yeah, please wrap up comments to the committee. Vice Chair Snyder.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, bill sponsors, for bringing this bill. But personally, I wanted to say some things to Representative Tipper, who mentioned, I think at the beginning, this may be one of her last bills. And, we came in together in the same class, and I've watched over these 4 sessions how you've brought some really complicated but important bills in the areas of reproductive health and in family and others. And forgive me, indulge me a little bit, but I'm adopted. I was adopted at 6 months, actually taken home at 6 months and adopted at 1 year. In several eras ago, when these things weren't discussed and they weren't talked about, I actually found out from the neighborhood bully at the age of 8 that I was adopted. And, you build up defenses, and it has been a defining piece of me my entire life. I think about, people I knew as a teenager and in college who were also adopted. My sister, who's 2 years younger than me, actually, they're all gone now because it has a real impact on people. And so I built up these defenses that I didn't think would ever crumble. But having observed how you really have passionately entered into these difficult spaces and has really helped me personally to come to terms with the things that I've faced in life. And I just wanted to thank you for that.
Representative Sandridge.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I want to thank both of you for bringing this bill. This is a big deal. Groundbreaking bill. A lot bigger than the financial, than the finance part of this. The finance part of this is just secondary, whatever. So, anything that's groundbreaking, there's going to be some opposition, and I don't know if I didn't hear too much today. This is something I need to do more research on because it sounds great, but I'm concerned that the opposition was not really. We didn't hear too much from them today, and I know there's probably more to this story than maybe was revealed. I'm looking forward to the second. I'm saying on thirds, I'll probably be a yes, but I need to do some more research and. Learn about the protections associated with the donors as well, and also make sure that this is over-regulated, but I want to make it clear this is a great bill. There needs to be rules. There needs to be regulation in place, and you're not going to really hear me say that too often. But I just want to make sure it's balanced and not over-regulated, and I need to make sure that my vote is an educated vote. So I'll be a no today, but I'm looking forward to a yes on thirds. Thank you.
Representative Daugherty.
I just wanted to briefly say thank you. I was shocked by some of the testimony, and I just wanted to echo what Rep. Snyder said about Rep. Tipper. I've really learned a lot from you, and you can tell how hard you work on your bills. I just want to say thank you, and thank you for bringing this, and you have meant a lot to me and a lot of our colleagues. So I just wanted to say that as well.
And I'll close us out by echoing all of this. You presented the bill with such compassion and grace. This is not an easy topic, and you have a big heart and have done excellent work. And thank you to both sponsors. So outstanding work. Thank you. And of course, I will be a yes vote. Ms. Shipley, please poll the committee.
Representatives Benavides.
Yes.
Dougherty.
Yes.
Kipp.
Yes.
Luck seems to have.
Excused for luck.
Lost luck.
Michelson Janae.
Yes.
Rich.
Yes.
Sandridge.
No for now.
Soper.
Yes.
Tipper.
Yes.
Snyder.
Yes.
Madam Chair.
Yes. And that bill passes with a vote of 9-1. Congratulations, you are on your way to the Appropriations Committee.